Okay, so have you ever started planning a weave or just doing a weave in general, and it doesn't really come out like you plan, and you're like, how do some people get these amazing weaves? And I can never seem to get there. It's quite simple. So, planning a weave is 4 different steps to get the absolute perfect weave. Now, if you've been watching my channel, you know I have a tendency just to go, well, whatever. I just want to make something fun for me. But occasionally, I do want to make something special for someone else, at which point I follow these 4 steps in order to make sure that weave is going to be perfect. Step 1 is planning. So during the planning phase, I find the draft I want, I find what I want to make, and make the image if I want to combine a couple different things. Say I want to combine 2 different styles of twill, or if you've watched my 5-in-1 twill, I planned out how to make each one of those twills and what order I was going to do them in. So that is the heavy planning. You're planning how long your warp is, how much waste you're going to have, how you're going to do the setup, and you're also planning how much yarn you need for the warp, for the weft in different colors, everything. You're planning everything. And this can be a pretty intensive step, and it can take quite a bit of time. Now, this is where step 2 comes in, because even after you finish all of this planning and you're like, okay, I'm going to set it in a 15-day read, I'm going to go ahead and do this style of twill, or I'm going to do an overshot. So I'm going to use an 8/4 cotton and then a 3/2 for the overshot. You just got this in your mind. The next step is sampling, because what you find is lots of times things don't always act the way you originally thought they would. So if you've worked with the fabric before, sometimes you can kind of skip this step because you already know how much it shrinks and everything that you're going to need to know. But even then, if it's a big project, I recommend sampling again anyway, because there can be some changes or you may have miscalculated. And on a smaller project, it may not make that much of a difference, but on a larger project, it will. So I still recommend sampling, especially if you're doing a new technique, because that new technique might even just take a little bit more draw in, or it may eat up your warp a little bit faster than what you expected. So when sampling, just keep certain things in mind. The sample isn't just while you're weaving it. You weave out a section, then you have to wet finish and dry it the way you intend to treat your finished project in the larger scale, so that you know that the shrinkage, everything is going to be exactly the same. And another great thing about sampling is because sometimes you think the colors are going to go great together. Say you're like, I've used these colors in this cotton and now I'm going to use it in this wool, and then they don't look the same, and they don't look the same at all. You're like, oh man. Or if you're changing the set because you're like, you know what, I've done this exact same thing in an 8/4, but now I'm going to pop it down to an 8/2 and it's going to just come together like cherries and cream. It doesn't always do that. So if it's just something that you don't really care and you're just like, if it's not perfect, it's for me, so I'm not going to care, then you could skip this. But if you're making it for someone else and you really want to nail this gift, or you're looking to sell this, sample, 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 sample. It is very important. Now, when you make a sample, you don't always need to make the sample full scale. So that's where a lot of confusion sets in. That is not something you need to do. When you're sampling, you can very easily just make a small, say 12 by 12 sample. That way you can finish it out. Now, I am planning a large project in the near future. I am not going to make this, blanket size sample. I'm going to scale it down to probably about a 15 by 20-inch sample. And that's going to be about 1/3 of the size of my actual project. And the reason for that is because I want to be able to do multiples of what I need to do. So now I can just skip my sample, multiply it, and there you go. I can get pretty easy math there instead of having to really try to hunker down and do numbers, which is not my thing. Next step. Step 3 is reconfiguring, because you are going to find a flaw. Doesn't matter what it is or where it is, you're going to find it. Maybe you're going to realize this pattern will be a little bit better with floating selvages, or it would have done just fine without them, and you shouldn't have added them because it made the sides look bulky. Knock them off. And then another thing is sometimes you realize that the way you have it set up, you're just not getting the size of the pattern you want. So that's pretty common. Is you set it up, you're like, yes, this is perfect, and you wet finish it, the shrinkage is right, the sizing of the entire project is right, but what's wrong is the motif size is itty bitty, or it's huge and it's just not what you wanted. And there are ways to fix that. If you want to make your motif bigger, you can always kind of space out the threads a little bit more. And if you want to make your motif smaller, you can kind of bring those threads in. And just kind of think of it like with a motif. If to create the warp for each section of motif takes 10 threads, and you've went ahead and you set this with A2 cotton and you have it at 20 threads per inch, you've now made that entire motif half an inch. So if you wanted to make it bigger, you would have to spread that out. So if you had something that was set at 10 ends per inch, you've now made the motif 1 inch, which is going to be twice as large, and it scales in that fashion. So a lot of motifs, some of them you'll see are actually 30 ends per inch, or are 30 different threads to create that motif. Some of them even go higher than that, but just whatever it is, if you use the same amount of threads, that's basically going to give you that motif within an inch. So if it's 30 and you use 30 threads, that's a 1 inch motif. If it's 30 threads and you set your reed at 10 threads per inch, or set your warp at 10 ends per inch, you've created a 3 inch motif, which is much larger. So if it's a little too small, use less threads. And if it's a little too big, use more threads in that same section. And that's going to change the thread size. So that's kind of what you're doing when you're reworking it, is you're figuring out what you really wanted to tweak. Maybe everything came out how you thought it would, and it's great, but now that you're looking at it, you're like, this is what I thought, but I'm not just in love. This is your time to really start going, okay, what would make me love it more? And you go ahead and work that in. Step 4 is you actually do your project. You just finish it, you make it, and you take your time. That's the big thing. Take your time. Because I know personally, I get to the point where I'm just like, I just want to hurry up and do this, and I just start weaving, and then you miss floats, you miss the floating selvage, you miss a treadle, you do something along the pattern and you just break the pattern, and you didn't even realize you did it because you were trying to go so fast. Take your time, enjoy the process. Don't try to go through the process as quickly as possible. You don't have to, go at a snail pace, but you do have to take your time and really make sure you're doing it right. Just take your time, count your treadles, count your passes, stop occasionally, make sure your beat is staying the same, because when you get in a hurry, you start to either beat hard or barely beat at all, and your threads will be inconsistent. So with some fabrics, this isn't so bad because you throw them in the washer and you wiggle them around and those threads will balance out. Other fibers, they're a lot more sticky. They are not moving. Once you set them there and you've pulled it off, that's where it's at. You place that fiber where you want it, or it's not moving. So that is just a little bit of difference. And here's a quick bonus tip. So a lot of the times when we don't sample, the reason why is because we don't want to waste the fiber. Now, I get it. I hate wasting the fiber. That's why I almost never do it. So unless I know I'm making something that's for someone and I will be very upset, or it's an expensive project that if I waste the fiber by messing up the project, I'll just be devastated, I don't usually sample very often. But there is a trick to help with reducing kind of that waste and that cost when sampling. So one way is to actually make a sample into something small. So you can actually make a small warp, and you want to do a specific pattern, you know what threads you want to do. You can actually make the sample a scarf, or you can make the sample into mug rugs or things like that, where you're actually going to get use from that project, but you're still going to have all of the information that you need for your sample to get the drape you want, to get the ends per inch you want, to get the picks per inch you want, in order to get all of those things, and you can still have something very usable at the end of your sampling. Another tip is, say your real thing is you just don't know what your ends per inch to set is, and you've worked with the more expensive, say you've worked with this silk before, but you don't want to warp up a silk in order to know exactly what you're going to do. You can find a fiber that you've worked with in the past that's a synthetic fiber, or just a less expensive fiber that's a similar thread count and similar texture. So it won't be exact, but it'll give you a starting place so you can figure out what your set is going to be and kind of how it will react. It will not be a perfect sample. It's not going to be one for one, but it is going to be a lot easier, especially if you're really wanting to stick to that budget and you don't want to use a whole, $30-$40 worth of fiber in order to do this tiny little sample to make sure it's going to work out. You can do it with something like a rayon or tencel that's just inexpensive, that you can get in a very thin set, and it's going to feel similar, not exact, but they're both kind of stretchy and they're both kind of silky, and you're going to wet finish them. You will get far more of blooming out of the bamboo type fiber, but you will still have a fairly good idea of what you're trying to do. So that's something I kind of have done in the past, where I find something that's a different synthetic fiber, but when I'm working with it, it feels similar, because that just kind of helps me gauge what I'm doing. And it has helped me with larger projects where I don't really want to waste that expensive fiber. And as always, don't forget, like, subscribe, share with your friends. And what would be your biggest tip to helping a weaver make their perfect pattern? So those are my tips of what will help you create your perfect pattern. These are the 4 steps I take whenever I want my project to be stunning and I don't want to have to redo it. These are the 4 steps I take. I don't always take them very often, but when I do, they take a long time, and it is worth it. It is always worth it at the end, because my project comes out exactly how I wanted, and I'm always very happy with it. So and let me know if there is. And don't forget, you can always check out our Discord. And that way, if you have any project ideas you want to share, or you just want to share pictures of finished projects, you can always do that. As always, have an awesome day, and catch you in the next one.